Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel, where the Chargers lose a Monday Night Football game that they probably kind of needed to have before going into Kansas City in a pretty poor way to Dallas. Unfortunate loss there. They lose 20-17. Just in terms of a playoff positioning standpoint, if we want to talk about these things, the Chargers playoff odds would have increased to a 54% chance with a win against Dallas, and they went down to about 30 to 34% with a loss to Dallas per the NYT upshot calculator, kind of turning next week's Chiefs game into what feels like more of a must-win scenario when you sadly kind of drop these should-have-won games against Tennessee and now against Dallas. But let's just jump into the game, I guess, itself. Herbert was the story. I think Herbert did not play very well. Should have had a better game. Throws the bad pick at the end, throws a couple of throws that just were mistakes, where he was just missing guys by 5 to 10 yards. Obviously missed Keenan Allen on what should have been two big explosive plays for this offense that didn't turn into that because he overshot him. And so it was just a very uncharacteristic Herbert performance. I think he, to some extent, is still learning to play with the current offensive line and the amount of pressure that the current offensive line is giving up. I think that that's a storyline to talk about just in that sense because, Will Clapp obviously is taken over at center. And now you've seen Rashawn Slater and Trey Pipkins kind of have two back-to-back pretty human games from a Slater standpoint. And I think the lower end of the Pipkins games. Now, it's worth pointing out they went against Max Crosby and Micah Parsons defenses, right? The assignment wasn't easy, but the level that we've come to expect is, I think, especially from Slater, for him to lead the team in pressures again is a little bit concerning. And, it just felt like because of the offensive line situation in pass pro, Justin Herbert felt like he was pressured even on throws where he wasn't pressured, right? And kind of made some erratic decisions because of it, made some bad overthrows because of it, and obviously, threw the bad pick trying to target QJ at the end of the game. So just a weird Herbert game in general. I think that he needs to be better going forward. And it's kind of too, I'm sure some of this was also discomfort playing with the hand. I know he said that it was not, something that affected him during the game, but you do look at this game as the Chargers took fewer snaps under center. I think kind of intentionally, right? Like I know they said, oh, well, we're going to work on it throughout the week and it's actually not going to affect it, but it pretty clearly did impact how the Chargers kind of game planned in this game from a Justin Herbert standpoint. And, I think in the macro, obviously, it affected Justin Herbert as well. I would have liked to have seen a better game from Justin Herbert, all things considered. And he's going to need to be better if they're going to beat the Chiefs. If you have any chance of beating Mahomes at Arrowhead, we need that, Herbert that we saw against the Vikings and saw, in some other games this year, but did not have it, I think, against the Titans. Did not have it, I think, in this game against the Cowboys either. And it was a pretty disappointing effort, I guess, to see just in a primetime sense. The offensive line obviously needs to be better from a pass pro standpoint. And I think that's why Herbert was feeling kind of as rushed as he did, even on throws where, again, he wasn't getting pass rush, but just some confusing decisions by Justin Herbert, if we're honestly kind of speaking about it in this game. Other stuff to talk about. I do think that the run blocking was pretty bad from this offensive line as well. And again, Dallas was getting continuous pressure. Makes it pretty hard to kind of run the ball when you're going against a team that has that defensive line on the other side, or against the Raiders, a team that has Crosby and, a bunch of guys that got opportunities opened up because of him. So the Dallas is a more complete defensive line in addition to what they have in Micah Parsons, and they blew up the run game. There was no run game, nowhere to run for the Chargers. 23 carries for 53 yards. Eckler in his comeback game has 14 for 27. Not the game that he expected, not the game I think this offense expected, because the offensive line blocking up front, it didn't feel like there was any penetration up the middle. And, not a ton of run plays. It feels like called to the edge as much as well when stuff up the middle wasn't working. But again, not sure how much better that would have gone given the games that Pipkins and Slater had. So tough game, I think, from a run blocking perspective and a rushing perspective too. If you don't have a rushing game against Dallas, it's just going to kind of limit your options, and they're going to take that because it's going to make your passing offense a little bit more one-dimensional too, especially in a game where you don't have Mike Williams and you don't have kind of the full assortment of weapons that the Chargers wish they did have. So, would have liked to have seen more from the rushing game, but the offensive line situation, much like we talked about with Justin Herbert, in addition to what Herbert was doing wrong himself, kind of precluded it. So, tough games from, both the rushing and passing standpoint. Receiving, shout out to Keenan Allen. He had an awesome game. Obviously, he finished with 7 receptions for 85 yards and a touchdown. Would have been 150 yards if Herbert just kind of hit him on the open throws. But he was, it's been interesting to see this season from Keenan Allen, in which he sort of had this resurgence. Not that he ever truly fell off, in any other kind of season. But he's obviously been dealing with hamstring injuries and other injuries the last few years. So to see Keenan Allen have this bounce back performance of sorts was nice. And, to continue what he's been doing this season, essentially putting up almost, 100 yards in what feels like every game. I know he didn't against the Raiders last week because of how the offense was. And obviously Herbert misses the 2 throws to him here, but he has played like a receiver that is capable of putting up 100, 150 plus yards every game. And that is not something that I thought Keenan Allen would be good this year, but I didn't think he would be at that top 5, top 10, or playing like a top 5, top 10 receiver type of level. Other than him in the receiver room, I thought Joshua Palmer had a good game for what it was worth. 4 receptions for 60 yards. He did get the 4th down play broken up in the end zone by Deron Bland. I think that I didn't love the play call again when you have a 6'6" quarterback that you could probably try to push over the line, on that 4th and 1 scenario, but they went for it, didn't convert, and kind of hurt them in the moment, given the scenario. But yeah, so talking about the receiver room in general, I just thought it was kind of a weird game. Per Arjun, the final receiver snaps ended up being Joshua Palmer, 58 receptions, Keenan, 57 receptions, 58 snaps for Josh Palmer, 57 snaps for Keenan Allen, 29 snaps for QJ, 10 for Keelan Doss, and 2 for Darius Davis. I was a little bit perplexed to see Darius Davis not get more action in this game, especially given he had the 51-yard run last week, or, the game before the bye against the Raiders. I would have expected to see him a little bit more involved. I think the Cowboys in particular, they would probably prefer to just have this game against the bigger guys without speed, because I think Darius Davis kind of would have given them more mismatch problems. So I'm a little bit surprised they didn't play him more in this game. Obviously, given Darius Davis' skill set, and you're not going to make him an every down receiver or anything like that, especially in 3 wide receiver sets or anything of the sort. But it was just a disappointing game that Moore didn't find ways to get him more involved. And then Keelan Doss, man, I don't know what the game plan was here with Quentin Johnson, and I think that's the biggest offensive storyline. But Keelan Doss was in 11 personnel on multiple 3rd downs playing over Quentin Johnson. And it just kind of made me yell at my TV, what are we doing? Does the coaching staff not trust Quentin Johnson? And maybe as indicated by that final play, maybe they don't. But Quentin Johnson also got open against the Jordan Lewis earlier in this game, where Justin Herbert took a hit and the ball got, ball got displaced in the air. I'll have to check PFF and route running resources to see what was happening exactly in this game. But it just felt like, we talked about over the bye, and, Justin Herbert said in his post-game press conferences, we got to find ways to get QJ involved. Why didn't you do that over the bye? Right? To just find those easy safety valves on offense. And I think then when it wasn't working for QJ, they just kind of like decided to decrease his involvement over the course of the game. He was out there on the final drive, obviously, but he finishes with 29 snaps, like I said. And they had Keelan Doss playing over him in like multiple moments of this game. So it was just like, what did you guys do over the bye, right? In terms of like trying to get not just Quentin Johnson, but more wide receivers like truly involved to take up that Mike Williams role, if you want to call it that, on offense, right? Like to take up more of that production. And it just felt really weird, to kind of, it felt like a really weird game for the receiver room outside of Keenan and Palmer, who were kind of your standard 1-2 punch. Outside of that, like it just doesn't feel like they're getting much. And it felt like Kellen Moore maybe realized that later in the game. It was like, all right, well, we're just going to roll out Gerald Everett and Donald Parham on a lot of like, 2 tight end type sets because we're not getting much out of our receivers right now. But I do think he should have played Darius Davis a little bit more. And in the macro, they got to figure out what they want to do with Quentin Johnson because it's getting pretty bad at this point. All right. Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton more to say on offense. Again, like I think the offensive line was pretty terrible. Like I said, they allowed a lot of pressures. No running game of any sort got going. Keenan Allen was awesome. The rest of the wide receivers, pretty mixed bag. And I think, Herbert being off obviously affects any kind of, thing you can do on offense. So, yeah, just kind of a disappointing game. I thought Dallas had a good defensive game plan, relatively speaking. But, it's just, you could just tell who kind of wanted it more in the critical moments, right? Like the Micah Parsons sack right after the 2-minute warning. It's something that can't happen, and the offensive line lets it happen. Justin Herbert clearly wasn't disciplined enough this game. And, really all the other wide receivers except for Keenan Allen, I don't know. Tough game from an offensive standpoint. And again, like I'm going to talk about the defense in a second, but it goes without saying that like any game in the NFL where you don't put up more than 17 points, it's probably, a lot to do with the offense relative to the defense, as much as we can complain about certain things. So keep in mind that is my opinion as we do shift to the defense and some of the things I'm going to talk about. But the defense is just so weird, man. Like I know that you look at the scoreboard and you're like, they hold Dallas at 20 points, right? And at the end of the day, that's enough, right, to win this football game. But it's a lot of the same issues that we keep seeing come up week after week after week, starting with Derwin James, right? Derwin James takes a bad helmet penalty where, again, he was headhunting, and the refs have been pretty clear the whole season, like, hey, you can't do that, and we're going to call it when you do it, right? And for Staley, again, at the end of the game, to call this, an educational experience, we're going to educate our guys. We have been educating our guys, and this is what we do. Like, I don't know. Like, it's been like 6 straight weeks of this, or 5 straight weeks with Derwin to, learn to not do that. I thought the roughing the passer penalty on Derwin was bullshit. Like, essentially, if you touch Dak Prescott, then that ends up being a penalty. Like, yeah, I think that's a lame call. But, he has to know, like, to not do the headhunting stuff anymore, because the league is like, we want that out of the game. We're going to call it. And if Derwin can adjust and, is a penalty machine getting, 2 penalties for 30 yards in this game, I think on the helmet to helmet, it was either 10 or 15 yards. If Derwin can't adjust, like they're going to have a problem in the secondary, and Derwin in coverage and all these other things, like, hasn't truthfully been playing as good as he has in previous years. And so when you're adding the penalty problems to everything else, it's going to make this Chargers offense or Chargers defense a lot more of an uphill battle. So, and Derwin certainly was not the only one on defense. The secondary was getting penalties called on them, and I thought the secondary was pretty like undisciplined for everything else, honestly. I didn't really like Staley's defense game plan with the secondary going into this game. And I know that sounds weird to say about a game in which they held the Cowboys to 20, but CeeDee Lamb also cooked them for 120 yards himself. And, whether it was Ja or Michael Davis on the outside on him, whatever it was, they didn't have an answer. And Michael Gallup was kind of like, I know the final like numbers, as I mentioned, are not dominant numbers, say for Michael Gallup or any other receiver that you're kind of looking at. But it was just the way that like Dallas missed a bunch of plays that they should have had too, right? On that first drive, where Dak gets the touch, or did they punt? Yeah, I think they punted on that first drive where they just kind of had some, missed opportunities. No, sorry. That was the Dak fake punt. Sorry, just had to look that up really quick. But, Dak on that touchdown drive where he ends up putting 7 points on the board on that fake 4th and 1 read option, like that whole drive, it just felt like a weird place for the secondary to be in, because I think Michael Davis gave up an 11-yard completion. There was a hold that he had on Michael Gallup that should have been called. Michael Gallup got wide open and Dak Prescott just overshot him for a shot in the end zone that same drive. So, it just didn't really feel like the Chargers, they trusted Michael Davis and Ja because they have to. Right, they have no other choice now that J.C. Jackson is obviously gone, and that experiment didn't work out. But it just feels weird to be in this position where it's like Michael Davis is your second best cornerback. Michael Davis, as he's been playing this year, has not been good. And again, I know what the final numbers will say in terms of Cowboys receiver performance, but like you look at how they were playing that game, how much Michael Davis ends up on the ground, how much Michael Davis just like winds up. A receiver winds up behind him pretty easily nowadays. I don't know, like it's just a weird game. Ja was obviously getting cooked in the slot, but again, that's a product of them not having any other options now. And I don't know if they're going to admit that they were like wrong. Like, I don't know if a Bryce Callahan signing could potentially be in the cards in the slot, but like they've been willing to let Ja grow with his lumps. And for what it's worth, I don't think Ja's been all bad, but it's like, you knew this game against CeeDee Lamb was going to happen, whether he was on the outside against Michael Davis and the slot against Ja, both of them. Like, I didn't understand kind of the game plan and the lack of adjustments that we just saw from the defense. Not that there may have been many adjustments to make, but it's like you got to find something like when your defense kind of is getting cooked by CeeDee Lamb as bad as it was. And the last thing I'll say about the defense here, because I think overall, look, there's not a ton of stuff to complain about with the defensive line and how the linebackers played. I thought everything from that aspect was pretty good. They got opportunistic sacks when they could have. Kind of a quiet game from Joey Bosa, but obviously he's kind of dealing with the toe as well. Khalil Mack had a pretty good game. Morgan Fox had a pretty good game. They got enough pass rush pressure, again, to kind of win this one. But like it's the discipline for me. Like that's the thing I continuously keep coming back to with this defense. 3rd and 19, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 6. You can't get off the field. And that's ultimately what gives Dallas the game on the field goal that they have on that last drive, right? So I think you can look at this from a raw scoreboard standpoint and go, oh, well, they gave up 20 points to Dallas. We should have had 21. We should have had 24. We should have had 28. And that's absolutely true. Based on how the offense played in this one. But, you're just kind of like thinking, again, dumb defensive penalties that they keep taking. 3rd and 19, I knew it was a lock before I even saw the play that there would be some penalty or some broken tackle that would cause Dallas to gain 19 yards or an automatic first down, whatever it was. And like, it's just not a championship level defense, right? When you're talking about like a team that could seriously give teams struggles in the playoffs, right? Not that I think the AFC is like stacked with these elite defenses per se, but it's like, if you've hired Brandon Staley as this defensive guru, so to speak, and we're still seeing the same 3rd down problems and the same penalties and the same inability to get off the field, and the same secondary that's playing 15 yards back, like whose fault is it at the end of the day, right? Like when these things keep happening. So I've just seen the Chargers defense, while they didn't specifically lose this game because of how the offense was, I've seen the Chargers defense lose this game before on several occasions, right? Like that is kind of the concerning part for me in all this. So Shout out to Ryan Ficken. I know I don't like do a bold breakdown special teams segment, but special teams was really good tonight. Um, with the forced fumble that gave the Chargers a chance to try to kind of win the game. You know, they jumped on that one. Good stuff from Fick. But yeah, overall, disappointing game on offense, obviously, and I think a worse than consensus game on defense. I know that may be an unpopular opinion in a game where they allowed 20 points, but it's like you keep seeing a lot of the same stuff every week, and Patrick Mahomes is going to be in a perfect position to take advantage. But I guess that'll do it for me. I don't have a ton more to say on this game. I wish I could be, angry guy to some extent, but I just felt disappointed that, again, a couple things didn't bounce their way. It didn't help that, honestly, the game was kind of boring with the ref ball that was going on and John Parry wanting his seconds of screen time. But I don't, I guess ending thoughts here. I don't know if I want to say, hey, like the season's over or any of these things. You never want to like overreact to one game and just be like, oh, well, they're 2-3, season's over. They play the Chiefs. Ultimately, they play some of these. They have winnable games on their schedule too, like Chicago. And so they can try to get back into this thing. I think they have games that previously looked hard that are winnable when you look down their schedule. But it's just like, look, if this is the effort we're getting, and I think it was a disappointing effort both offensively and defensively, to be honest with you. It's just hard to see this team putting 4 quarters together, even though they're capable of it, to beat Kansas City. It's tough to see them putting 4 quarters together to even beat some of the easier teams on their schedule, like Chicago, who has been known to give teams problems with, Justin Fields and DJ Moore, which doesn't help when you have the secondary problems the Chargers have. So, even though that's a winnable game on paper, very much so, do I trust the Chargers to win it? I don't know. But yeah, ultimately very disappointing game. Makes their next couple games here of a very pressing moment, to be honest. If they cannot, I think Steven said on the podcast, if they can't get into, week 11 at, 5-5, week 12 at that point, given their schedule and given the games that they finish with, it's going to get ugly real fast. And I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that this team has some fight kind of left in them. But honestly, from all perspectives tonight, aside from Keenan Allen, I saw a team that didn't have much fight left in the tank, which was pretty surprising. Coming off of a bye where they should have been, in theory, well rested. Shout out to the defensive line a bit too. Course, holding Pollard in the run game down and getting pass rush pressure. Aside from that, not really sure who else showed up tonight. It certainly wasn't Justin Herbert, and it certainly wasn't the coaching staff. So, sucks to lose that game. Sucks to lose a bummer. I can't even say fuck Dallas because that was my plan if we had beaten them, but we didn't. So, bolt up and hoping for better things against the Chiefs. And I hope your mental health is better than mine.